All right, welcome to the lunchtime video. We're gonna pick up where we left off, and that is verifying the example here. So we're gonna start on router 4 and do the classic essential command when you're doing any sort of dynamic routing protocol on BGP. Show route advertising, and then your protocol, and then also show route receiving. If it's not in examples, we'll do it extra just because of how important that command is to be comfortable with. So we're going to be looking to make sure all of those communities are properly added. So it looks good so far. Now we'll have a :3 beginning with the fourth one. So yep, :1, now :3. And then the rest of them will be :3. Perfect. So all of that looks good. Now let's look at router 2. Oops, so got a problem with router 2. We're not advertising anything into BGP, so there's obviously some kind of issue with either the export policy, the routes from the routing table are not making it into BGP somehow, or there's an issue with this neighbor. This is not the correct neighbor statement to use. So let's start there and look at the neighbors. So yep. So this, I think it is probably worth a downvote. Yeah, like if you're thinking about the same kind of idea that if I can figure it out, it's not worth a downvote. Like, yeah, for simple things, but they just straight up tell you the wrong neighbor check. That I think is worth a downvote. I mean, we can see here, we're configured with these two neighbors. We're not even configured with this neighbor here. And not only that, this whole document had a bunch of those little errors where it's like, oh, well, if you're studying to learn about BGP communities, surely you're not going to be tripped up by that little error. Well, as they add up, and now you've got a big error, it's telling you the wrong neighbor to check. This definitely deserves a downvote, so I will be submitting a downvote for this. First, I'm going to try to determine which neighbor this is actually wanting these routes to be received from. So I'm going to start by looking at the first neighbor here, and then I'll look at the second one. We'll see what the differences are, and we'll see if just from that alone we can determine which one it had intended to look at, 192.168.0.1 or .0.3. So we're not getting anything from .0.1, and we're not getting anything from .0.3 either. So that's interesting. I wonder if what they meant to do, yeah. So I think they put the wrong router here. I think we're meant to stay on router 4 and check router 4. So let's go back into router 4, because it says on device R4, check the routes sent to device R1 and device R3. So device R1 has its own neighbor address, device R3 has its own neighbor address. So yeah, but this, there's so many errors. This is definitely worth a downvote. So this is meant to be done on. So I'll just say this is meant to be done on R4, not R2. Because this one legitimately did, like, yeah, I figured it out, but it did throw me for a loop, and kind of, it's one I hope that they will fix. All right, so back to R4. All right, so now from the other neighbor, we've got the same routes, aha, but we do have a difference here from group to R2, and everything looks good. So we'll switch over to :3 beginning at the 4. Yep, perfect. So let's look at that other neighbor again, just to make sure we notice the differences. So a different group to R1. But other than that, we are going to be learning the same routes. We're just going to be learning it from a different neighbor. You notice we have Nexthop self on both of them. I think we set that in policy. Don't remember. Let's see here. So this is R4. Nexthop self. Yes, I don't remember. I don't know why it's Nexthop self, since we didn't set that as a policy. So that'll be interesting to learn more about. I think it has to do with the fact that it's got a local address statement. Yeah, that's just something to hopefully learn about. Maybe not spend too much time on it, but I will definitely need to know about that sort of thing during the test. So we can see router 4 has tagged the routes with the communities 64511:1 and 64511:3 and sent them to device R1 and R3. So here's router 4. So R1 and R3 has been sent these devices, but if I do a show configuration, pipe display set, pipe no more, you can see that it's got this export, this export policy, send static, but part of that policy, send static, tags them with that community string. So before they're exported, they go through this policy and they get that tag, and now they're in the BGP protocol with the tag. So let's take a look at router 2 now. And here's that second essential command to know anytime you're doing import or export policies with a dynamic routing protocol on Juniper devices. Receive dash protocol. Just like advertising dash protocol, this is an essential must-know command to be 100% familiar with. Okay, so now, oops, and it looks like they've got the output here as if they didn't have the extensive keyword on there. So that's another error. That's one, it didn't cost me much time. I think I'm not going to downvote for that. As I said, I don't downvote every little issue. I only downvote the things that really kind of throw me for a loop. So I'm not going to downvote for this, but I hope when they address, or if they address the downvote I submitted previously, they will take a look at this as well and just review the whole document, because this whole document does have a lot of issues. But we can see the local preference has been changed. So we've got routes with 50, and we've got routes with 200. And that's because show configuration, pipe display set, pipe no more. We have this policy well, we're going to have to look at R1 and R3 because they get tagged with the communities on R4, but we'll look at the configuration here. We can see that when it gets to R1, let's say, so it has an import policy here. So before it puts it in its routing table, it gets it from R4 and it says, hold on a second. Okay, let's see here. Aha, communities from, this is, yeah. So communities from R1. So this is a really, really, really bad community name because it should say, yeah, that's a horrible community name. I think a better community name for that would be like preferred routes, or like active routes, backup routes. That would be a better, because from it's not, these routes didn't come from R1, they came from R4, and this is a import community. This change local preference community, you can see very clearly it's an import community. So it didn't come from R1, it came from the BGP update message from R4. So to call this policy from R1, that's probably even, I think that's worth a downvote in itself, because it's such a bad policy name. And it really, like, you know, I'm trying to learn about this sort of stuff. So when I see names like that don't tell you what it means, or kind of mislead you, like, let's say I was trying to learn that in order to, I mean, you can, yes, it's just a name. It's not that there's anything wrong. It's just, it's misleading. So let's see here. So the term names for the change local preference policy statement are misleading. Since an import policy applies to routes since applies to the process to processing a route received, since an import policy applies to process since an import policy is to process a route received from a protocol in order to determine its place in the routing table, a name like from R1 is harmful because it misrepresents the intent of the policy and the way the routes are traveling. A better name would be a better name for the terms from R1 and from R3 on R1 and R3 would be preferred and not preferred. Yeah, I think that would be a much better name, because then you know a number of things. So I'll even from R4 preferred, and then from R4 I'll even kind of stick to there, but you can see, you know, I'm already influenced by their bad naming. Like, this is just a bad name. So basically they're naming my son Petri Dish, and I'm saying, I don't like the name Petri Dish. Why would you name him Petri Dish? Let's compromise and name him Jim Petri Dish. Well, you know, why is Petri Dish in there? Why do I have to compromise and say, I'm going to give let's compromise, I'll meet you halfway? You know, meeting someone halfway when their position is so far out in the extreme, so harmful, so just, you know, wrong, is I don't think a good idea. So just because somebody suggested that they name their child F-Face or Dumbo or something, I don't think it's reasonable to say, oh, well, let's compromise and let's name him Bob F-Face or John Dumbo. It's like, no, like you've got to pick a name that's going to give this person a self-identity that is valuable to them, and not one that will kind of cement their identity as somebody who is worthy of being mocked. Like, you want to instill to them an identity that allows them a greater chance of being successful with fewer unnecessary obstacles. Like, in my opinion, like, some people might have a different opinion about that. I know Penn Jillette named his daughter Moxie Crime Fighter because he wanted her to have a more unique identity and kind of be an individual person that didn't kind of blend into the fold and wasn't kind of just your average person. That I understand. But he named her Crime Fighter. He didn't name her Moxie Criminal. He didn't name her Moxie Idiot. You know, you've got to have names that are useful and that are meaningful and are meant to add something instead of to not add something. And this name from R3, it's not at all a reasonable name. So I'm actually gonna not meet them halfway on that, and I would say it would be preferred and it would be not preferred. Because yeah, you can say it's from R4, but you don't even know it's from R4. Like, yeah, it came from R4, but as we can see in our output here, it went through an AS path. So, okay, so yeah, it originated in AS 64511, and we can see we're in 64510. And yeah, R4 is in 64511, but we don't even know if it's originated from R4 in 64511. It could have originated from a different router. And then for that matter, if it went through another AS, we know it wouldn't have originated from R4. We would have received it from R4, but to just say from without specifying if that's where you received it from or where it originated is not a useful name. So in my opinion, kind of the only useful name you could use for this policy is preferred, not preferred, because that's what you're doing, and that gives you a accurate picture of your intent and an accurate picture of the mechanisms that will actually unfold through your configuration. So this, I think, is a huge downvote. It's really, especially for this to be educational material and to be teaching that, it's just, I think it's just really, really wrong. In fact, I'm gonna ditch it in here because it's just gonna serve to make everything a lot more confusing. So let's see here. So let's do show pipe. And I'm going to need to do this on router 1 and router 3. And it is a lot of extra work. But as I said, it's just serving to make things more difficult. And as I said, this is a great tie-in to the previous, like the running themes concepts. Lessen your failures. And I actually elaborated on this. You want to have impactless failure and impactful success. If you fail at something, you don't, the failure isn't that you crashed the plane. The failure is that a perfect example I thought of earlier, actually. So Stephen Curry, one of the best basketball players, unarguably the best shooter, he has a great video on YouTube where you can watch all about his basketball coach and what he did to help Stephen Curry kind of be the best he can be. So he says he put the sprinkles on the cake, and he runs Steph Curry through all these extra drills designed to make him as best as he can possibly be. So what happens when this trainer is upset with Steph Curry? When this trainer says to Steph Curry, you're doing this thing that bothers me, I've told you not to do, you need to get better at this thing. What happens? Steph Curry does something freaking amazing that the entire rest of the world couldn't ever even imagine doing. He dribbles 2 balls in one hand, does these crazy drills, but his head's a bit too far forward. But he's not quite squatted down enough in the right position. But, all these little tiny things that, yes, he's failing. He's not doing it in the exact, perfect, correct way. He's going to tire out faster. He's a little bit in less control of the ball. He's got a higher percentage of having that motion fail. He's might have a higher percentage of injuring himself. Yes. So he's failing to do it the best he can possibly do, but it's an impactless failure. It's really not going to matter that much. And the purpose is to lessen that too. He's trying not to do that. And then meanwhile, his successes in these exercises and the fact that he's doing him stuff are very impactful. He's becoming a much better basketball player for having to do this. So I think that's the perfect example of having impactless failure, where all he's doing by doing these exercises not exactly right, wrong, is just simply that. He's not breaking his neck. He's not missing the final shot in Game 7 and losing the tournament. He's just simply being yelled at by somebody he hired to yell at him. So that's the perfect example of impactless failure. And those are the kind of failures that you really want to have, ones that you can get up, you can learn from, and you can continue on. You definitely don't want impactful failure, because that you cannot recover from. You break your neck, you don't get to try again. So impactless failure, and you want impactful success. You don't want impactless success, because it doesn't matter that you did it right, it didn't impact anything. So impactless failure, impactful success. And one of the best ways to have impactless failure is to lessen your failures. You're going to fail by having your head a bit too far forward when you're doing the dribbling drill, and then your coach yells at you, you're going to do what you need to do to have it perfect. But meanwhile, you've been doing the drills the whole time, and you've been crushing it at them. You've been doing your coach was. Yes, you fail at it sometimes, but your failures are all impactless, and you get to try again, and you get to continue doing those drills, which over time, or even just right away, you have success in. But those successes are very impactful and allow you to have failures during your games that are far less. So one of the failures might be you tire out and you can't play a little bit extra because your form wasn't exactly perfect, but in the meantime you hit the game-winning shot, or you're a little bit more sore in the elbow than you would have been if you were actually perfect, but you've got days to recover. You're going to be fine, But if you miss that winning shot, that's a very impactful failure. So you want impactless failures, you want impactful success, and you want to have your failures be as less as possible so that you can recover from them and learn from them and keep on moving on. That's one of the main themes behind this channel. And again, it's not to say that failure is bad. It's saying that failure you cannot recover from is bad. But even then, you can change careers. If we're talking in extremes, there's still a lot you can do. But I think the point is hopefully well understood. Leave a comment or something if it's not clear, and I can elaborate on it some more. Maybe in its own video, I can start a sub playlist on just philosophies, and we can have discussions about that. I, of course, don't have perfect philosophies and beliefs, but it is something I'm very interested in, because I think having ones that are as good as they can be is useful. All right, so we're going to change this, and now remember, this is for changing the local preference. So these are going to come from router 3, and we're going to change the local preference on these. So root CLI configuration type display set type no more. So let's see here. So I kind of understand more about what they mean by this. They're saying from the perspective of router 2, you will receive these from router 3. But as I said, it's a bad naming. So I think these are going to be because this is from R1. Let's see here. I'm actually going to need to. Okay, I'll be able to fix this. It's just kind of difficult, but it's good practice for the exam. So the local preference 50 is going to apply to find R3 routes. So find R3 routes is the term. So where is the from? Okay, so I'm going to roll back 0. Do that again. Okay, now I get the, so I'm going to do edit, policy options, policy statements, change local preference, show pipe display set relative, Okay, so now we can see very clearly the community here is going to be from R1. So, aha, so here's the name of the community. But remember, these are not, let's see here, from R1. From R1. And it's going to be doing what? See, this is where what I was thinking is, oh yeah, maybe this naming makes a lot of sense because it's going to be appending this community on there. So yeah, if it's coming from R1 and you put this community on it, then yeah, that's a good name. But this is why this is such a dangerous name to have, because we're not appending these communities on there. We're changing the local preference. So this is a completely misleading. You can see how confused I am by this naming right now. That might actually be something I might want to think about in the exam. Is if I see naming that just makes no sense at all, just being good at going in and updating all the naming, it's like I'm not going to be fixing the issues. I'm not going to be getting any extra credit. But as I work through this and I read a policy that says send traffic left, but the goal of the policy is to send traffic to the right, you know, how much more difficult is that going to make things? So if I simply just change the name of the policy to send the traffic to the right, it won't affect what the traffic does because it's just the way the policy is named, but it will affect my ability to comprehend what that policy will do. So I think I'm going to do that, to be honest. I really think that's a strategy I'm going to take when I show up in the exam. If I see some just complete BS naming like this, I'm just going to fix it up and say what I think it means. And if it turns out to not mean that, and maybe change it again. The only problem with that is it's a lot of config. Like you can see here, I've got to delete these. So community, but I'll show you here. So delete policy options. We're going to delete these communities because this is where that naming all starts. And you can see just how silly of a naming this is because these routes are not from router 1 or router 3. So they're actually received from router 4. So it should say router 4 for each of them, but you can't have the same name of the policy. So I think a better name would be relating to what we want to do. So we want the routes tagged with a 1, which we can see we're going to do on router 4. So these are the ones that are going to be, they're going to be sent to both router 1 and router 3. But we can see here is where, aha, community add. Whereas on router 3, from community. So there's a big difference there. We can see, let me make this a lot more clear. On router 3, which is going to be the same as 1, we have these statements from community. So all we're doing is we're looking at the route and we're matching the community. But on router 1, we have these statements community add. So we're adding these communities on them. So yeah, this even over here, this statement from R1 makes no sense at all. They're not coming from R1, they're coming from R4 because that's where we added those communities are. The communities themselves are not coming from R1 or R3. They're coming from R4 because this is where we add them. On R1 and 3, the communities are looked at, yes, but they're not added or removed. They're being used to evaluate a decision, and that decision is the local preference. So if they match the find R3 routes or find R1 routes, then they will be, their local preference will be changed depending on which change local preference term they match. And even these term names are kind of bad. One thing I will do though, let me see if the how many verification steps there are left, because I might just run through. Oh, there's one more verification step left. So yeah, I think I'm just going to do that one final verification step before I make any commits. I did this one before, but I just wanted to type it out again. So this one is the final one. So here's all the, and we can see we're learning this from 2 different neighbors. So this is where that naming makes a lot of sense if you're thinking of it from the perspective of R2, because yes, the route is going to be learned from a specific neighbor depending on that local preference. But the thing is, configuring them on here themselves, it's harder to think that way, because you're thinking when you configure it as if you're looking at the routing table on R2, which to me is just kind of a strange way to think about it. But you know, the purpose of this channel is to learn more about networking and ultimately pass this exam. So if that's actually a better way to think about it, just from the perspective of the routing table you want to be a certain way, I'm happy to adopt that. But let me, as an exercise, go ahead with that renaming that I wanted to do, just to make things more aligned with kind of how I would have expected them to be named. And we'll compare that with what is in the documentation and see which one is more useful. It could be that the one in the documentation is more useful because it's centered more on the routing table on router 2. It's thinking about the naming from the vantage point of the routing table on router 2, whereas my naming would be thinking about the routes more based on kind of a per device or overall vantage point. And that might not be as useful. So let's just see what makes more sense. So I'm going to be able to filter out for from, and I will, well, I've got 4 minutes, that might be enough. So configure private. Delete. Delete. Set. Okay, so let's think of a better name, because it's, yes, if we think of it as though we're the routing table on router 2, yes, it's going to come from router 1. And that's because router 1 will set the local preference to 200 for any routes with this community path attribute. But if we think of it more from the perspective of router 4, where we don't know necessarily what's going to happen down the line, or just thinking about it in a more way like from R1, well, I mean, honestly, now that I'm kind of thinking about it a little bit more, and this certainly doesn't invalidate my whole point about lessening your failures and having impactless failure but impactful success. It doesn't, you know, just because I'm going to use I would use the naming all in the document, you know, I might have said that it's a bad invalid naming, but the time I made that statement, I wasn't thinking of how it would be perceived if you were thinking of them from the vantage point of the routing table on R2. So I think this naming actually does make a lot of sense if you think of it in that way. So as far as how I would have changed it, let's see what happens if I change it to how I kind of said that, or because I submitted a downvote. So let's change it to how it would have, to what's in the downvote. And you can see already here, I can't use the name preferred and not preferred because they're both going to be preferred. But, well, actually, are they both going to be preferred? Let's see here. So VO1, VO1, VO1. Oh, yeah, it looks like, oh, yeah. So starting with 4, yeah. The ones 4 through 7 will be preferred from router 3, but 0 through 3 will be preferred through router 1. So I can't really use preferred for a keyword here, or for a name here, because both of them are going to be preferred. So yeah, from router 3, run from router 1, that kind of does make sense as a naming, actually. I might have prematurely downvoted this one because I just wasn't thinking of it the same way the authors of the documentation were. And I think I know how they're thinking of it now, and I think I agree with that naming. So, all right, so I mean, that's just less work to go through, and the video is almost over anyway. So sorry for that rant. I think I did want to bring that up eventually anyway, about having impactless failure and impactful success. But the example of changing that naming to be something more easily understood really doesn't quite apply to that, because if you're thinking of it from the perspective of the routing table and router 2, that naming actually does work pretty well. So, all right. So this is now done, though. That's the good news. So implementation. All right, we're almost done with this whole section of BGP. One thing I'll probably do once I finish the BGP section, the whole part of BGP, is maybe some math to look at how long it took me to complete that. And then if I go at that same rate, when I can expect to take the exam, when I can expect to have completed my full studies and can take the exam. I think that'll be some really valuable math to do, and I'll do it right here on this channel. All right, so the next is going to be on extended communities. And we're just going to have 3 routers, so I'll get rid of router 4. Hopefully I can just reuse these. Perfect. Oops, router 4 did not go away. So router 2 is going to be to router 3, which is going to, well, router 2 is going to be to router 1, which is going to be to router 3. So I don't need this link here. It just takes a while to delete. Sometimes I get impatient and then I try to send the delete signal again, but it had already deleted. It just hadn't showed me that yet. Okay, so now we're pretty much set up for the next exercise. Let's clear off those routers, get everything nice and set up, and then I'll open the next video by reading the exercise. Okay, so let's look at the show configuration, or sorry, show system commits. So we've only got a few. Roll back to 2. Oops, that's too many. Roll back 0. Roll back 1. Perfect. All right, so everything is set up and good to go for the next exercise. So next exercise will be configuring extended communities in a routing policy. I'll start by reading out the documentation, but in this exercise, we learn more about the running theme behind this channel, impactless failure, impactful success, and lessening your failures. We learned about instead of modifying community attributes themselves through an import policy, how to just make decisions based on what the setting is and then just leaving it as is. In this particular case, we looked at setting the local preference. We also saw how when a router receives a route from 2 peers, how it will use that local preference, the one with a higher local preference, to determine which one to use. Unfortunately, I shut it down too early, and I kind of wish I had done some Wireshark captures on that. But anyway, we got to keep moving. Test is coming up real soon, so stay tuned for the next video where we look at extended communities.